We are live now, yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ICHRRF Professor Ved Nanda Fellowship Training Program weekly seminars. ICHRRF has this fellowship training program starting from January 1st, 2022. For people who are not familiar with ICHRRF, it stands for International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. And this is our logo. On behalf of the Board of Directors and the executive team of the ICHRRF, I invite our audience to yet another seminar in the ICHRRF Professor Ved P. Nanda Fellowship Training Program. Please. Our distinguished faculty in this program include Professor Ved Nanda, Professor Yashwant Pathak, Professor Nalini Rao, Professor Lavanya Vemasani, myself, Dr. Adityanji, Mr. Carl Clements, Mr. Hardam Tripathi, Dr. Yashodhan Agolgaonkar, and Professor Nidhi Shandurnikar. We have two fellows currently. One of them is Mr. Ankit Shah, and the second fellow who joined on January 1st batch is Mr. Ripudaman Pachori. Our weekly seminars have a standard format. First 20 to 25 minutes, the fellow gives a presentation. This is followed by a 10 minutes commentary by our chief mentor, Professor Ved Nanda, in whose honor and in whose name we have started the Professor Ved P. Nanda Fellowship Training Program in Human Rights. And this is followed by a 25 minutes discussion by the faculty preceptor for the particular seminar. And last 30 minutes are a question and answer session in which anyone from the audience can participate without any problems. So the topic for today's weekly seminar is blasphemy laws and violation of human rights of minorities. And the fellow who is going to be making a presentation today is Mr. Ripudaman Pachori. And we're glad to have our faculty preceptor, Mr. Hardam Tripathi, Esquire, who is a young attorney as well as Director of Legal Affairs and Policy Affairs at ICHRRF. Before we start the program, actual seminar, I have a few announcements. The first announcement is that Ms. Thinley Chukki Dasa, Esquire, will join as a fellow in Ved P. Nanda Fellowship Training Program from July 1st, 2022. We have another application pending at this point in time, we do not know. ICHRRF completed a special hearing on Kashmiri Hindu genocide last Sunday. This was attended by 105 people. 12 victims and survivors testified, and we got wide media coverage of this event. And the last announcement is that Professor Arvind Sharma joined as member of the International Advisory Board of ICHRRF last month. So we are calling for more applications from potential candidates for fellowship training programs. And we are also inviting volunteer faculty members if they want to be part of faculty of this particular program. A few housekeeping rules. I would advise everyone to keep themselves on mute. Kindly change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not interrupt our fellow who is making a presentation or our chief mentor or the faculty preceptor. During the question and answer and discussion, only those members of the audience who openly identify themselves will be allowed to ask questions. Anonymous questioners are not encouraged. We encourage all of you to send your questions by the chat function. While asking questions, please be very specific and precise. Don't write a lecture or a monologue in the guise of a question. Lastly, we are recording this event and it will be available later on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. And with that introduction, I am going to invite Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, who is the fellow presenting today on blasphemy laws and human rights of minority populations. So, Ripudaman, you have 20 to 25 minutes to make presentation.
All right, thank you, sir. So I'll start with my presentation now. Blasphemy laws and violation of human rights of minorities. So first, we'll try to understand what's the meaning of blasphemy. It's in a religious sense, it refers to a great disrespect shown to God or to something holy or to something said or done that shows this kind of disrespect. There's another word called heresy. It refers to a belief or opinion that does not agree with the official belief or opinion of a particular religion. Both words are also sometimes used in general, not necessarily religious context. In this presentation, we will examine how the freedom of expression, right to free speech, right to have own opinion is being compromised, especially among the minorities because of the blasphemy laws in various countries which are influenced by the religion of the state. In the United States, people mostly equally divided on whether the Bible should influence the US laws or not. What does the US law says about blasphemy? Different statutes have different languages, but it boils down to whoever willfully blasphemes the holy name of God by denying, cursing, or continuously reproaching God, His creation, government, or final judging of the world, or by cursing or continuously reapproaching Jesus Christ or Holy Ghost, or by cursing or continuously reapproaching or exposing to contempt and ridicule the holy word of God contained in the Holy Scriptures shall be punished. These punishments include imprisonment from few months to few years, with or without fine. However, it is not a criminal offense and is considered as misdemeanor. Misdemeanor. The famous phrase here we use in United States is "In God we trust," but which God? And the law says one who um, uh, disown the wordings of word and denounce the rule of the government of that God. So the question is, which government we are talking about, the God's government or the government formed by the very people of this country? In the United States, there have been very few cases where people were actually punished. Now I'll give some context of Europe. Surprisingly, there are more countries in Europe where these laws are more strong and related to blasphemy. The misdemeanor is a penalty for blaspheming the holy name of God by cursing or continuously reapproaching uh, God. Examples of blasphemy: vain, taking the Lord's name. When you say something like, "Oh my God," you are using His name in vain. That might be punishable. But if you say with some expression, oh my God, that represents your feeling, so that may not be punishable. Taking actions against Holy Spirit is one example of blasphemy. Um, is God's good intention is unclear. The process of co-opting the name of image of Jesus, a religious document can be burned, a church is being damaged, worshipping the devil, um, that we, at least I do. Um, Blasphemous art is created or depicted. It is forbidden to insult or show contempt towards a deity, sacred object, or something considered sacred or inviolable, such as disrespecting a deity. Now, there have been, I'm going to produce some references in the to in a historical context, like in the Bible, uh, Leviticus 24:13 to 16. It's a third book of Bible that justifies where it is justified the death penalty of blasphemers by stating that hanging or stoning was the most common punishment. The Lord's name will be blasphemed to the utmost extent possible, and the congregation will stone him if he is not stoned. In Quran also, it recognizes blasphemy as a separate offense from apostasy, but accepts blasphemous repentance. A blasphemer who does not repent will be executed. In Asia, um, the Queen's law prevailed. The Queen of UK, all the laws wherever United Kingdom had colonies, they ruled. Their laws trickled down in their colonies, whether still ruled by UK or they are independent. Um, and those laws, in fact, are influenced by a Bible. Um, and but in many of the cases, especially in UK itself, these are getting abrogated, especially in England and Wales. I'm not sure about the Scotland and Ireland. However, in the countries like India, um, where the constitution is based on the British Constitution, has adopted the law as it is. Same happened with the Pakistan also. After independence and the formation of Pakistan, um, the British law was adopted by the Pakistani constitution as well. In Pakistan, in Pakistan law, section 295, which is a blasphemy law, it has many sections. It was adopted by the British law. Pakistan, being an Islamic country, also have influence of the Sharia law on the Pakistani judiciary system. During the Ziaul Haq regime between 1997 and 1998, it was amended many times, and new laws were added, and um, new clause were appended to it, and the existing laws were modified to make these laws more strict. Uh, one can be charged with the imprisonment of 5 years to lifetime, or even death sentence. If someone is booked under Section 295, there are chances that person will die in prison. There have been many cases where to take over someone's property, people blame the other party of disrespecting Prophet Muhammad and or having possession of written material that has insert words for the Prophet Muhammad or God. Again, words against the God they believe in. Asha Bibi, a Christian woman versus state. There's a famous case over there where a woman was sentenced to death but was later released when there was an international outcry to release her. In other case, in another case, there was a minor 13-year-old boy who was issued death sentence for writing insult for profit in the toilets of a mosque. Point to be noted that in Pakistan, this law is a Sunni, is for and mainly caters Sunni Muslims and is mainly imposed on Shia, Ahmadiyya, Hindu, Sikh, Christian, and atheist population. These all are the religious minorities of Pakistan. So, if you do not believe in the state-sponsored religion, you are more likely to be punished with a severe punishment or imprisonment with lashes, rape, torture, and possibly death penalty. Surprisingly, the blasphemy law is the in the country like Pakistan are strong because of lot of factors. One is a social factor. There is a lot of social support and the political factor. The the there is a lot of politics around the religion of Islam over there. Without public support, these laws do not stand. They do not have any legs. But yeah, there is a lot of support from the public to implement these laws as strongly as possible or strictly as possible. The United Nations General Assembly UNGA has adopted an anti-blasphemy resolution. Pakistan supported the Islamic Republic's foreign minister announced on 2nd December 2020, despite vehement opposition from the European Union and other Western nations as well as India. And see what Pakistan foreign minister says about it. Due to the effort of Pakistan's delegation, the resolution for the first time this year also acknowledges the significance and respect for religious symbols. The adoption of this resolution by UN General Assembly is part of Pakistan's diplomatic efforts, inter alia, for raising awareness about Islamophobia and countering the defamation of sacred religious personalities and symbols. The Pakistan mission worked hard to rally the Organization of Islamic Cooperation (OIC) and other developing countries to garner support for inclusion of new element in the resolution. Remember, the Pakistan's constitution is very much inspired and influenced by their religious law, which is a Sharia law. And we can say that Sharia law has found its roots in United Nations as well now. Australia, Australia does not have very strict rules related to blasphemy. Mostly it's not a crime over there. In Africa, mostly countries have very strong laws related to blasphemy with severe consequences, including punishment like death penalties. Making movies, uh, writing anything that hurts the sentiment of the public who believes in Islam is a crime, and you can be charged for death penalty. Legal background and genesis of the blasphemy laws. Some of the references that I have already provided from Bible and Quran. We have covered that one. The concept of blasphemy embarked and originated from Greece in 325 AD. Its evolution as a wrong spurt as the concept of monotheism was developed. In around 12th and 13th century, Jews gave the somewhat definitive structure to the concept of blasphemy. It was established as law in Europe in the 13th century. The landmark case was the John Taylor in 1675 that embodied the definition of blasphemy in the context of a state. Some landmark cases Um, First, I'm going to talk about these cases related to United States only. I don't have many of the case jotted down, just a few of them. United States for blasphemy was Abner Neeland in 1838 versus state of Massachusetts. This um, under this this case was widely publicized. There was a week-long trial followed, and during which Bimba's attorney, the person which was charged for blasphemy, uh, li likened atheism to religious belief and maintained that individuals had a right under the United States Constitution to believe or disbelieve in the existence of God. Bimba was ultimately found not guilty of blasphemy but convicted of sedition, for which he was fined $100 at that time. In sorry, in 1928, there was a case um, which was between Charles Lee Smith and the state of Arkansas. Um, that case also uh, basically heard for a long time, and that person was also fined with $100 and released on bail of $1,000. Smith appealed the verdict. The case then dragged for several years until it was finally dismissed. There have been two other cases that I have listed where the blasphemy laws overturned. This was in the Supreme Court, Joseph Burstyn um Inc. versus Wilson in 1952, held in New York State. Blasphemy law was an unconstitutional prior restraint on freedom of speech. The court stated that it is not the business of the government in our nation to suppress real or imagined attacks upon a particular religious doctrine, whether they appear in publications, speeches, or motion pictures. There was another a very interesting case in 2010 in Pennsylvania, where this filmmaker, um, his name was George Kalman. Um, he formed a limited liability company LLC and chose the name of his LLC as I Chose Hell Production LLC. A week later, he had received an unsigned letter explaining that his application was rejected because his company's name could not contain words that constitute blasphemy. In 2009, he filed suit to have the provision against blasphemy struck down as unconstitutional. During the trial, Kalman explained that at one point he had become suicidal and felt uh, that he had to choose between death and hell. On June 30, 2010, U.S. District Judge Michael Ann Baselan of Eastern District of Pennsylvania, in a 68-page opinion, ruled in favor of Kalman, finding that Pennsylvania's blasphemy statute violates both the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. See, in all these cases that we have covered, these judgments appear to be clouded personal vendetta, prejudice against minorities, self-interest, and envy and power. As one of the famous journalists, Mashal Gohar said, too many precious lives have been lost as a result of this law. Now it's the time to reform has been the time to reform for the reform has been long overdue. Further, for the God's sake, I reiterate the fact that blasphemy laws are man-made and not the divine creation of the God, thus prone to human error and abuse. I'll finish my presentation here, sir.
Thank you very much indeed, Ripudaman, for keeping within the time limits and giving us an overview of the blasphemy laws and their impact. Now we will invite our chief mentor, Professor Nanda, to give his expert's comments. Professor Nanda, please.
Well, thank you very much, Adityanji. Today, again, what I have done is I have changed my schedule so that I could hear our distinguished faculty colleague, and then after hearing both of them, whatever little I need to add, I'd be happy to do that. And you have been very kind to give me the time beforehand, because most of the time I do have, unfortunately, a commitment. But today, again, I got rid of that. And so I'm looking forward to hearing our faculty colleague.
So our faculty today is Mr. Hardam Tripathi, who is director of our legal and policy affairs, and he is a practicing attorney in state of Florida doing immigration law. So I think it'll be very interesting to hear Mr. Hardam Tripathi's views on blasphemy laws. So Hardam, the floor is yours now.
Especially after all those cases that have been heard. Please go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Good evening. My name is Attorney Hardam Tripathi. Thank you, Dr. Adityanji, for the introduction, and Dr. Nanda for your insights today. And a great job to our fellow who happened to give us a very holistic overview of blasphemy laws, and how it affects religious minorities across the world, and the human right implications as a result. So today, piggybacking off of what that gentleman just stated, I kind of want to discuss blasphemy from a holistic level as well, but I want to really focus in on the United States and how blasphemy is treated now, as well as talk about how minorities are affected worldwide, and kind of the context and the significance of blasphemy laws and where they were, historically speaking, and where they are now. And so to get right in and to follow the time restrictions, I will keep it very brief and to the point, because it is a very broad subject, and it can be applied to various elements of freedoms that are afforded to people worldwide. The way I'm going to break this down, my presentation primarily, or this dialogue we're having, is going to be broken up into 4 sections. One is broken into freedom of expression. Those are rights that we all have as human beings and throughout the world. Freedom of speech is another very important right. Freedom of religion. And then ultimately the rule of law. How is this applied with respect to blasphemy laws being applied to certain geographical areas, and specifically in those areas, the minorities that are afflicted by that, based on what the majority is trying to inflict on them. So ultimately, I look at this as a geographical issue. I look at it as every country has different traditions, different customs. And when you have a country, no matter where you go in the world, there is always going to be a majority and there's always going to be a minority group. A lot of the times you do see that the reason these blasphemy laws were first created was ultimately to protect the majority groups or the majority religions in those areas. If you look at the Christians in the United States in early U.S. history, in places such as Massachusetts, for example, where the population was primarily Christian, with the Quakers as well, you'll see that blasphemy laws were very prevalent. If you go to areas, in Pakistan, for example, you will also see that based on the majorities between the Sunnis and Shiites, you will see, if you go to South Asia, if you go to North Africa, you've always seen this drift between the majority and the minority, and the majority always scapegoating the minority due to their goal of emboldening those hardliners, basically. So ultimately, how it was and where it is now, I think there's a good view on blasphemy laws now. People are more likely against blasphemy laws. You are seeing a decline in blasphemy laws and the criminalization of blasphemy worldwide. And reason why that is I think there's more education about it. I think there's different pending viewpoints, and I think the world is becoming better in a way in terms of combating incitement to hatred, or basically knowing that everyone does have these freedoms. So ultimately, when we talk about freedom of expression, first and foremost, a lot of the times you're seeing that if you go to countries like such as North Africa, you see places like Egypt, for example, or if you're in Southeast Asia, you'll see places like Indonesia, where you have multiple sects of religions, you have different social groups, you have different political parties based on the geopolitical area they're from, and you see that there's always a majority group. What they tend to do is they tend to use blasphemy, basically the action. I'm looking at the action, not specifically the fighting words that are used, but the action itself. In those actions, you're seeing that they're basically doing this to silence the minority. And in doing so, you're seeing, even from a social perspective, you see police officers on the street who will idly sit by and watch these things happen. You'll see groups that will not stand up for fear of retribution to their livelihoods. A lot of this has economic sort of repercussions, where if people stand up, then they can ultimately lose land, they can lose property. So these are all things that are all come full circle if you really think about it. And when you look at how it disproportionately affects minorities, you see a bunch of groups. So you're seeing now slowly the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights being utilized to protect these freedoms of religion and the freedoms of speech. And a lot of countries are now signing up for this. So you are seeing there's like 53 countries right now since 2019, based on Pew Research, that said that there were actually countries still practicing this. But you're seeing more of a pushback by minority groups, NGOs, human rights watches. You're seeing a lot of that occur. And so the future is bright for blasphemy laws in terms of anti-blasphemy. And so that is a good thing. You are also seeing freedom of expression really be a pillar, basically, in these minority areas. So instead of attacking religious minorities, such as people in Nigeria and Pakistan, you are seeing people standing up. You're seeing laws being passed in these countries and in international courts of law that are basically settling disputes that arise because of people standing up. So one big thing where I specifically want to talk about today is in terms with the U.S., and that's with the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion. Ultimately, the country of America obviously was founded on Judeo-Christian values. And so when you had the Pilgrims come and you had all these people come from Europe, ultimately the law, the Constitution, everything was created based on the concept of Christianity and Christian principles. However, America is a land of many. You see a lot of people with different religions, such as Hindus, Sikhs, you see Jews, you see Muslims, you see a whole bunch of different religions. So historically, in the 1800s and early 1900s, you saw in U.S. law blasphemy being used, but very, very not as often as we would have thought. It's very antiquated, it was very imprecise, and it was very vague. And basically, the Supreme Court in SCOTUS really took this up in the two cases that our fellow had just discussed. Before I get into the case, just very briefly, it's very important to understand what the freedom of religion really is about, right? So freedom of religion is broken up. If you read the freedom of religion, when everyone says freedom of religion, when you read the clause in the First Amendment, it literally breaks it down into two types of categories. One is the Establishment Clause, and the other one is the Free Exercise Clause. Now, the reason why this is very important to know when discussing blasphemy laws and discussing how or what rights minorities have in the United States as it relates to freedom of religion, it's very important to note what the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause are. So, for example, for the Establishment Clause, you'll notice that the government basically said, when our founding fathers in the United States basically wrote, they wanted to prohibit the government from actually establishing a religion. So that's why if for those who live in America or those overseas who see there is a separation of church and state, you are starting to see that this is a very important concept in law, right? In the actual law written based on the Constitution. Back in the day, they were using common law, where blasphemy was actually very much utilized, but nowadays it is not, because of precedent and stare decisis, the concept where there is precedent, and now if anyone tries to bring these types of cases up, you're not going to see much pull for those who are in favor of blasphemy and to follow blasphemy laws. The other part of the freedom of religion is also the Free Exercise Clause. The Free Exercise Clause basically says that the person, the individual, has every right to practice whatever religion they want, as long as there's nothing that's indecent or there's no public morale being being basically ripped apart, or or if there is a compelling government interest. But as it goes back to the Establishment Clause, that was what the government really looked at in the case which our fellow talked about in the Coleman case. In the Coleman case, basically where the gentleman talked about I Choose Hell Productions, they really looked at the language. They looked at kind of what is blasphemy, and that's blasphemy in like words. But we're talking about actions here. Ultimately, when you look at that, they said that the government basically did not have the authority to ultimately, based on the First Amendment, to basically utilize blasphemy as a way to, go against this person who was a minority of sorts in the business world. So basically, that statute said that basically it violates the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment, because any sort of speech, and this ties into freedom of speech, right? That's what I meant earlier when I said it's all full circle. It's all tied in. And so ultimately, what speech you use and what religion you have, and ultimately your expression to do what you want to do in America, is all intertwined as it relates to blasphemy laws and those minorities who are afflicted by it. With ICHRRF, we tend to think minorities as religious minorities and minorities in other countries, but if you look at it from a legal perspective, there's also minorities in terms of business, minorities in terms of a way of life. So minority can be a very broad type of word, right? So that's one case where they use freedom of speech as a way to show that blasphemy does not work and is not the law of the land. And then ultimately, before even that, in 1952, you had the other case, the Bernstein case that our fellow talked about. That was a SCOTUS case. So that's the law, the supreme law of the land. And in that case, you were literally looking at the state of New York, and they were talking about how the government isn't in the business of suppressing speech. And so if you take that principle, I think usually the United States does a pretty good job with respect to human rights, as compared to maybe other countries who have a different viewpoint on human rights based on long history and culture and traditions, such as probably like Saudi Arabia, for example. So when you look at this and you use the United States and how they handle, the human rights, and you look at how other countries also handle human rights, you can kind of see that more people are starting to follow the UN human rights committees. They're starting to follow the laws of what the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom or Religion or Belief follow. And you ultimately see that totally in the long-term spectrum of things, that blasphemy laws are probably going to be continually be antiquated, and that minorities will not be ultimately discriminated against as long as the world continues to fight back against the scapegoating that continues to exist. So I just want to really say thank you. I wanted to stick within the time parameters. I would like to leave a little bit of time for questions and answers, but it is such a broad topic. There's so many examples, of course, of where this is still prevalent. I mean, 4 in 10 countries, honestly, are still practicing this blasphemy laws. And they're doing it because ultimately they want to either have political control, they want to have religious control, or they want to have socioeconomic control. So at the end of the day, we can all learn from those countries who have adopted these resolutions based on the United Nations and continue to be the driving force to educate and ultimately advocate for those religious or different types of minority groups who suffer because of the blasphemy laws in place. So thank you very much for allowing me to present, and I look forward to a dialogue here and questions and answers. Thank you.
So let's invite Professor Nanda now.
Adityanji, thank you. And Hardamji, Ripudamanji, excellent work. And since they have talked about cases, and Hardamji has talked about the First Amendment, I need to simply mention to them that if they like to look at it, there's an exceptionally good article that came in December 2021, and this is in Harvard Law Review. Exceptionally good article, Blasphemy and the Original Meaning of the First Amendment. And the article simply says how initially the thought was that First Amendment notwithstanding, blasphemy laws are okay. And I think both of them might have looked into it, but you might also look that there is in Senate an effort today to say that blasphemy laws ought to be considered as unacceptable, and action taken in terms of totally eradicating any thought of blasphemy laws. Blasphemy laws, as both of them have mentioned, they are criminal action, criminalized And what it is, act of expressing contempt or lack of reverence for God's sacred things. I don't know if many of you or some of you saw that, but 3 days ago in Pakistan, there was a teacher in a madrasa, and that teacher was killed by 2 students and a person who was their aunt. And these 3 women killed that teacher. And the allegation simply was that a student had dreamt, and in her dream, she saw that that teacher had committed blasphemy against uh, against Islamic religion. Here it was about the Prophet, and that has happened many times in Pakistan. We probably again recall the governor of Punjab killed. I had the opportunity to listen to the son of that governor, who had again looked at many cases that of blasphemy accusation. And his considered opinion was that no prisoner accused of blasphemy has ever gotten due process. And one of my students this last year did some work on blasphemy. I have not done any original work on it, but he found that there are 84 countries that at the present time have blasphemy laws criminalizing it. And I had seen, I think a couple of years ago, the Pew Research had done work, and they had gone to a whole lot of effort and research and came to a conclusion about 79 countries. But my student found about 84 countries, and then I confirmed that that number is correct as of last year. The sentences from fines to imprisonment to capital punishment. And in Pakistan at the present time, again, my student did a work and found the number of people who had been killed. And it was many Ahmadiyas and many Christians, and then also Hindus, all Sikhs, Buddhists. There was no discrimination. It was equal opportunity killing of people accused of blasphemy. I think I'd probably stop, but I might mention a couple things, and that is that at the present time, there is an effort in many countries to get rid of these laws as mentioned by our colleagues. The point simply would be that when you think about the freedom as was mentioned, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all those freedoms, at least there is among scholars, among my colleagues, a very clear picture emerging after their research that it absolutely is a violation of human rights, and there is no issue about it. Pakistan and many other countries have defended, found basis in order to say that freedom of speech is obviously not absolute. You've got to have some exceptions. This is one because it probably leads to religious tensions. And equally important, and perhaps much more important, is the argument contrary to it that blasphemy laws and criminalizing blasphemy is the reason that for religious tension, but more than that, as mentioned here, that it is the one that's responsible for minorities being discriminated against. I think I'm going to simply stop, but I would suggest to Ripudamanji to look at that Harvard Law Review piece, but it's primarily on First Amendment. And then to go to just simply that Pew Research. And you probably might have seen that the commission that the US has on international religious freedom, it had also a hearing. And that hearing, I think it was probably last year. And in that hearing, they also had several people. And I think at that hearing also, if I am not wrong, I didn't check it out again. The governor of Punjab's son was also one of those who spoke there. So I think we might like to look at those couple, three things. And since you talked about the United Nations, the committee that is on the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, that is the Human Rights Committee, it also had given its own conclusion, its own kind of, usually what it does is that after looking at reviewing a particular issue, it has gives its own opinion and conclusion. And in that one also, its decision was that blasphemy laws are violative of human rights and we are to get rid of them. And as both of them have mentioned, in many countries at the present time, they have taken them out. But 84 countries is a lot of countries. Many of them do not enforce them, but those who do enforce them, and primarily it's the Islamic countries, and that unfortunately the Dutch issue, the French issue, both of them are in front of us. So that becomes a real difficult issue to grapple with. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nanda, as always. Very wise, scholarly comments, very informative and educational. One always learns from you in your brief comments. We have plenty of time for discussion and question and answers. Before I open it for Q&A, I would invite ICHRRF's Board of Directors member, Professor Yashwant Pathak, if he has any comments on this particular topic. Professor Pathak.
Namaste everyone. I do not have any comment because I do not have much background in this area, but my question is that are there any countries where they have strong laws but they have never implemented it? And second thing is that are there any countries who are using the Islamic blasphemy laws to punish the Islamic culprits in their country? Has such type of scenario happened anywhere that they said that, hey, this is what you have been following and this is what we are going to do it? Is that happened anywhere in any countries like France and other? Yeah, go ahead, Ripudamanji.
Yeah, so yes, there have been cases where it's an Islamic country and they are punishing the people who follow Islam. Like we have seen in Saudi Arabia, we have seen in Pakistan, especially Shia Muslims are the one who are being punished. Ahmadiyya Muslims, which are not considered as Muslims, they are also being punished. So that is one example. Your second question was, um, are there any countries who do not have these laws? So yes, there are countries. They have kind of laws related to freedom of speech, which basically revolves around the blasphemy laws. So basically, they can use that law interchangeably, uh, you know, for different purposes. Especially in the Africa, there are some countries. I do not recall the names, but yes, there are. In there is another category of countries where it is the law is there, but it is not a criminal offense if it is you are charged for that. So yeah.
I think to both those questions, Pathakji, my student did very extensive work on it, and there are many countries where the laws are on book, but they are not enforced. And second question, this 3 days ago in Pakistan, the person who was killed is a Muslim, Muslim teacher in a madrasa. And 86 of those Ahmadiyas had been massacred just on this issue. So in Pakistan, that has happened. And also at the same time, there are plenty of cases where you find that a person, that governor of Punjab is a Muslim, and there are many other Muslims who have been killed just in the name of blasphemy.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to invite our Executive Director, Carl. Do you have any questions or comments?
Just looking at the ranking of countries listed by severity of blasphemy laws, and of course, most of them in the top 2025 are Muslim, but in that set, there are a couple of non-Muslim countries that stand out. Greece is one of them. And then Thailand is another one. I'm kind of interested in what the situation is in Thailand, if anyone has any information on that, especially usually we associate blasphemy laws with, Christian or Islamic culture. I wonder what it is like in a place like Thailand, if someone has some information on that.
I'll answer that question.
Not
Thailand
enforced.
it's a less majesty law, anti-monarchy, and that's a very severe law. It has nothing to do with religion.
I see.
The king is a revered figure in Thailand, but you need to understand what is happening in Thailand. Again, it is misuse of the less majesty law. There's a king's party which keeps on changing the name and all that sort of thing. The country is a constitutional monarchy, and unfortunately, in any open election, it is the anti-monarchist party that wins, and they ban the party, they banish the prime minister or whatever. But whenever they have free and fair elections, the anti-monarchist party, whichever is, happens to win. So a coalition of high army generals and military people who are part of the establishment have used the less majestic laws to victimize proponents of democracy and free speech. So it is technically not a blasphemy law, but people kind of put into that. But I will be happy to hear Professor Nanda's comments on that. Professor Nanda, you are muted.
No, I thank you. I was simply saying that you accurately presented the picture about the king and monarchy, and you can't really say anything against them. But that kind of law is not simply there in many African countries at the present time. And in many other countries, you do find that they have any time they want to suppress the opposition. They say against the state or against the government, you can't do anything. And right now, Russia has said anything that you say about the war, and nobody can say it's a war. So I think those kind of efforts by those who are in power and want to keep themselves in power by the use of force and coercion, they have always done that. Adityanji, my apologies, I have to go. So thank you very much, everyone.
Very fine. You have
Yes, sir.
been very informative and educational to all of us in every of the seminars. We understand your time commitments. So thanks a lot for coming to the seminar. And we have, a very small group. We have a guest here, Mr. Rustagi. Mr. Rustagi, do you have any questions or comments before I try to wrap up this?
Yeah, I only meant to ask that is there something being done to, basically for the media, because media sometimes blows some of these issues which are not as, important out of proportion. So is there some thought going around that? Though I understand that, curbing the media is basically goes against the freedom of expression.
Between Ripudaman and Attorney Tripathi, anyone has a response?
So, Mr. Rustali, did you say you said curbing the media? So you're saying that if the media has an effect, could you kind of rephrase that so I can understand your question?
No, you see, sometimes these kind of cases, particularly, I have certain instances in India in mind where they are misreported, and there is, the press is divided, and some cases are blown out of proportion, whereas they do not have the element of blasphemy in them, but still it is shown as an intolerant country, or majority is shown as an intolerant community. So, is there any thought how that can be fought?
Yeah, so you actually see that a lot, right? In a lot of countries, usually the media is a separate arm of the state. I mean, you see that usually in a lot of different countries. Here, there's supposed to be a free media here in the United States, and the media is supposed to report without any bias. But in other countries, the media is basically reporting what the state wants them to report. You see that in Russia, you see that in Thailand that we just talked about. That's why in my presentation, I brought up the whole geopolitical aspect of it, where the media is ultimately feeding people not the real truth, but what the government or what the state wants them to hear. So in a way, it's kind of like that riles up the base, or that riles up the majority, and ultimately undermines the minorities and the rights that they have. So to answer your question, I mean, it goes beyond blasphemy. I think it's more about how do you ultimately advocate for policy change, but how do you do it in a country where the majority will either kill or harm or jail any dissidents? So that's kind of where I look at it from. So that's a very good question. It's a tough question, but there's no clear-cut answer too, in my opinion.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot, Attorney Tripathi. I'm going to give some of my comments and sum up this seminar. So I'll start with Ripudaman. Ripudaman, in your presentation, it was an excellent presentation, but there was a factual error. You had mentioned that after 1947 in India, the laws passed by British and also in Pakistan, they were passed over. And you made some statements to the effect that British Constitution was adopted. There's no British Constitution. United Kingdom, aka Britain, does not have a constitution. So there's no question of adopting a British Constitution. What were inherited were colonial laws. And in fact, unlike the two divided countries, India did develop its constitution, which was promulgated on January 26, 1950, but was accepted by the Constituent Assembly in November of 1949. But Pakistan worked without a constitution till 1956. The first constitution in Pakistan was adopted in 1956. So from 1947 to 1956, Pakistan continued to use British law, but there was no constitution of Pakistan. So that's just a tangential mention because it was a factual error. People think that Britain, being a constitutional monarchy, has a constitution, but it does not have a constitution, and it's a shame that it does not have a constitution despite claiming to be a country ruled by law. I actually have some severe observations on some of the comments Attorney Tripathi made. And I think that is what you said was a simplified generalization when you said that people are speaking about blasphemy laws in various countries. So we have to take it in a very different manner. In United Nations, there are 194 countries, member countries. And Professor Nanda told us that there are 84 countries that still have blasphemy laws. And in most of the countries, blasphemy laws are either not on the book or are not implemented or are just ignored. And that gives a deceptive impression that the entire world is moving towards, delegitimization of blasphemy laws on a superficial dimension. The reality is that if you see these 84 countries, majority of these countries have state religions, And there are only two state religions. One is Christianity, second is Islam. Out of these 84 countries, 55 countries belong to OIC, Organization of Islamic Countries, 55 of them. And the countries in which blasphemy laws are not being implemented now are historically Christian countries that have evolved to become liberal democracies or constitutional monarchies. So these are the European countries that have Christian past. Some of them still have Christianity as state religion, including Great Britain, where they are not, just like in United States, they are not implementing blasphemy laws. But unfortunately, in the 55 countries that are members of OIC, there's a great resurgence in implementing blasphemy laws. The punishments have been actually made much more stringent. So if you see Pakistani Constitution of 1973, the blasphemy laws were made much more stringent and death penalty was introduced. You look at Indonesia, which is basically an Islamic majority country, but there are 5 state approved religions. In provinces like Aceh, which is more like Western Indonesia, the blasphemy laws are implemented very harshly. Now that is the legal position. What is the other position? That some of the adherents do not consider nation states as supreme or sovereign. So you introduce a diktat by a religious authority, and that religious diktat is carried out transnationally, violating the national boundaries and national laws. And under the garb of blasphemy law, or having committed act of blasphemy, people sitting in third country are ordered to be killed. And I'll give you a very famous example. That famous example is author Salman Rushdie. The diktat came from Iran to kill him. He was living in London at that time. He was a British citizen. At this point in time, he lives in United States. And that has been almost 3.5 decades till this happened. And the diktat has never been rescinded. Of course, if he is in United States, probably the state machinery will make sure that he is not hurt. But that is a dimension you have to understand. That although there may be a superficial general trend that blasphemy laws are being ignored by various countries, especially constitutional democracies, liberal democracies, but in OIC countries, the laws are being made more and more stringent, are being implemented. And even before the law is implemented, there's an extrajudicial process of killing, eliminating the alleged blasphemer. This has been seen as a trend in OIC countries, not just one country. In other words, common people who have no judicial authority, no legal standing, are taking the law in their own hand, or perceived law in their own hand, are becoming the jury, the judge, and the executioner, denying any due process in that country's legal system. And that is very worrisome. And that trend is also being reflected in United Nations General Assembly. Because in United Nations General Assembly, things are adopted by majority, one country, one vote. And if you have a bloc of 55 countries bringing a resolution, so year after year, resolutions are brought in and passed also in United Nations General Assembly, which Mr. Ripudaman Pachori mentioned, that in December of 2020, UNGA passed a resolution supporting the blasphemy laws. And extension of blasphemy laws this year, United Nations General Assembly passed March 15th as the International Day for Islamophobia. The line is very slippery. The slope is very slippery between blasphemy law and Islamophobia. So if you criticize a particular tenet, you might be first called Islamophobe, and then it might be alleged that you committed blasphemy because you criticized certain tenet, and hence you are a sitting duck, you are a sitting target to be executed. This is a very worrying trend from perspective of human rights of minorities globally, transnationally. And I would say that United States is complicit with this attempt, with this trend, supporting it, because your own House of Representatives have passed recently a resolution, a bill, which might become a law if it is passed by Senate also. United States House of Representatives passed an Islamophobia bill without any debate. So there are serious implications. We cannot say everything is hunky-dory sitting in United States, because the political establishment behaves in a certain way and creates problems. So there are human rights implications for minority populations. And it's not that you are sitting safely in a country, because if in a third country a diktat is passed that you committed blasphemy, there are a lot of instances in which social media posts have led to targeted killings, because those social media posts were perceived by individuals to be blasphemous towards their religion. So we are going into a very uncharted territory. When social media was not there, you could say something, you could criticize something, and nobody will know about it. Now everybody is on social media, and we carry on our conversations in modern times on social media, and it is indelible. You leave footprints. So these blasphemy laws are severely anti-freedom of speech, anti-freedom of expression, and they will have chilling effect on free and fair debate, free and fair dialogue, because some people will always perceive you to be blasphemous. If you can just kill somebody, that a third person had a dream about somebody, in the dream possibly carrying out a blasphemous statement or act, and it was just a dream, and you carry it to the ridiculous extent and justify killing of a human being, I think that is travesty. That is irony. And all of us in the civilized world need to start looking beyond what United Nations General Assembly is doing. By supporting these trends, just because a country with 14,000 citizens has the same vote as a country with 1.4 billion people. Some of these countries that are member states of United Nations are very small countries. But in UNGA, you have one country, one vote system, and how the resolutions are carried out is dependent upon just that particular count. So I see very worrying trends when every year in United Nations General Assembly, resolutions are brought forth supporting blasphemy laws, supporting so-called Islamophobia laws. I think this is going to have a chilling effect on human rights community and freedom of speech. So issue is very, very serious. It's not so, simple as it appears to be that, yes, those were the things in 1838, something happened, nobody bothers, nobody cares, all that sort of thing. I think we need new institutions to govern international relations. We need new ways of combating. Basically, these are kind of hate crimes claiming to be dealing with hate speech. If you kill somebody just because you don't like a statement, it's a hate crime. But you also allege simultaneously that the victim of your criminal act indulge in some kind of hate speech. I think it is what at least in behavioral health called projective identification. So the current scenario does not look so good as far as I am concerned. And I chose this topic to be discussed in this seminar because we have very, very ominous trends coming. And what is happening that liberal democracies are being subverted by political establishments because of vote considerations. So just think of the implications before we summarize this particular topic. It's a serious issue, and in the public discourse and public debate and in international forums, I think we need to use our intellectual strength to deal with this juggernaut of pro-blasphemy trends and pro-blasphemy laws, which are misused all the time. So it's not a minor issue. I think with those comments, we will end the seminar. We are a very small group, but we had a very interesting, very productive discussion on targeted executions based on blasphemy laws by extrajudicial actors.
Yeah, I was just, even reading the article that Professor Nanda mentioned from the Harvard Law Review, that talks about the difference between being able to, criticize intellectually a religion versus reviling God or reviling Jesus in that context. And that's a distinction that is arguably a good one. However, what we're seeing with blasphemy and heresy and so forth, it's just weaponizing religion and for the purpose of identity politics and political power, whoever may be even in Ukraine today, we see that one particular sect of the Orthodox Church that happens to have close links with the Russian Orthodox Church is being they're trying to ban it in Ukraine, even though that church has come out time and again and condemned the invasion and so forth. So we're seeing again over here where religion and religious churches are just pawns on a power chessboard. With respect to blasphemy, looking at it from the perspective of Islamic jurisprudence itself, it's very interesting. It's not really about criticizing something that the Prophet Muhammad did or didn't do. It's rather a moving target, and it's basically the rule of the clergy and the sultan, whoever that might be. And it's not really about facts anymore. It's just about who happens to be in power, and that's really the crux of the issue.
Thank you. With those comments, we are ending the seminar. Thank you everyone for attending the seminar, presenting the seminar, commenting and critiquing. And we will meet next Friday again for the next batch of seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Namaskar.